This video continues the history of the Keoghoe family, but rather than the family as a whole, it will focus on one member in particular. She was known in the family as Aunt Em Snooks, but she was born Emily Eliza Keoghoe. Even those who met Aunt Em knew nothing or little about her, and all the people you see here had known her, spoke to her. Fafa had worked with her and lived with her. Most, if not all, the information we have about Aunt Em has come down to us from her nieces, Fafa's children. And because Fafa's first child was born when Aunt Em was 31, her early life is a complete mystery. And perhaps because of this distance in years, Aunt Em kept herself to herself. There are no pictures of her that anyone can find, at least on the Keoghoe side of the family. Yet she lived until 1973, when most people had cameras and many had cine cameras. Fafa's parents, John and Sarah Keoghoe, had 3 boys and 3 girls. Aunt Em was their second child and Fafa was their fourth. They both suffered the loss of their eldest brother William in 1900, and they were both old enough to have felt it, Aunt Em particularly so. She witnessed the deaths of 4 of her siblings. One of them, Lydia, was born in 1894, but only her baptism has been found in the record. Who's Aunt Em Snooks?
I think she's something to do with Nanny Maud. Cousin, maybe?
I don't know.
I have no idea.
Who's Aunt Em Snooks?
Who?
I've heard that name before, but I don't remember where. Obviously somewhere in the family.
Yeah.
Snooks. No idea.
Who is Aunt Em Snooks?
I have no idea who that is. Don't.
Who's Aunt Em Snooks?
What?
In fairness, there are some people in some families who don't even know who their aunt is. Not everyone knows who their great aunt is, let alone a great-great aunt. And the number of people who know who their great-great-great aunt is, or was, likely to be very small, unless they are interested in their family history. So we are lucky to have surviving nieces to ask, only one generation away from Aunt Em, and who both spent over the first 40 years of their lives with Aunt Em Snooks being around. Although not exactly in their lives or even much of part of their lives, they all shared part of being in the same time and sometimes even the same space. Who's Aunt Em Snooks?
Who's Aunt Em Snooks? Daddy's sister.
What do you know about her?
What do I know about her? Not a lot. What have you got to do with him, for f***'s sake?
Who's Aunt Em Snooks?
I used to see his granddad's sister. Albert's sister.
So what's she to you?
She's an aunt, isn't she?
What do you know about her? Know anything about her at all?
But you asked Doris anything?
Yes, I did. I'm asking you now.
And did she say that she was living with Charlie Farrell? Charlie Farrell and Johnny Snooks.
The mystery came to light whilst researching the lives of Nanny and Fafa before they were married, when they were Albert Keoghoe and Maud Gladden. The records examined, the census, the electoral registers, baptism certificates and so on, were all normal up to 1901. Both Maud and Albert were in the records and their whereabouts known, and they could be traced from birth. This is the 1901 census, showing Fafa when he was 12 years old, living with his family at 35 Punderson Gardens. Aunt Emily Keoghoe can be seen just above him. A younger sister is below him, Alice Maud, She died 2 years later in 1903. This is the 1911 census for John Keoghoe, Fafa's dad. Fafa, who was 22 just 4 days before the census was taken on April the 2nd, is not at the same address. Neither is Aunt Em Keoghoe. John Keoghoe has now moved to Falkirk Street in Hoxton with a new wife, a widow, Alice Johnson, and her 5 children, although the marriage never took place until 1916 when he was 56. John and Alice have also got a new son of their own, John Keoghoe, aged 3 months. John's first wife, Fafa's mother, Sarah, died in 1909 in the Bethnal Green workhouse. The inference here is that John Keoghoe left his wife destitute, but there's no way of finding that out, or whether Aunt Em or Fafa were in a position to help. The 1911 census for Maud is a little more complicated. She's shown as living with her parents, William and Annie Gladden, at 31 Matilda Street. However, her name has been crossed through, and for census purposes she would not have been counted as living there. She doesn't show up in the transcript, for example. She's shown as 18, single, and a domestic, etc., for printers, etc., and then at home. It isn't easy to work out what all that means, but in any event, being crossed off means she was not there on April the 2nd, 1911, when the census was taken. It can be seen that her father William made a few mistakes, but there is no certainty either way that Maud was not there. This document then, the 1901 census, was the last official record where Fafa, Maud and Aunt Em Keoghoe were listed. This remained the case until Nanny and Fafa got married in May 1915, and they appeared again, this time in the marriage records. The same with Aunt Em, who married a year later in 1916 to Alfred Snooks, the surname which she would forever be known by. But where were they for that 14 years? Research had dried up. There was nowhere else to look, and for over a year the mystery was forgotten about. Then one day, in a casual conversation with Maud and Albert's youngest daughter, Marie Alice, a name was mentioned that the researchers had never heard before, and this triggered new research, and an even bigger mystery began to unravel.
Did you ask Doris anything?
Yes, I did. I'm asking you now.
And did she say that she was living with Charlie Farrell? Charlie Farrell.
So to sum up, Maud, Fafa and Aunt Em cannot be found in any record, especially the 1911 census. This is a particularly important document because it was the first time that English census forms had been handwritten by the householder, or whoever in the household could write. Other family tree companies were checked online like Genes Reunited or Find My Past and so on. Nothing was found. And then, as we have seen and heard, Auntie Marie mentioned someone called Charlie Farrell, who she thought Aunt Em might have been living with, and that he might have been a stepson. Doris felt the same and could even name 1 or 2 roads Aunt Em had lived in. But they had no positive information who Charlie Farrell might have been, because people never spoke about things like that. And for Marie at least, Charlie Farrell seemed to be old. Marie also added that Aunt Em never had any children until she had John Snooks in 1920. Now we had a new surname to research. Things could start moving again, and the first name searched for was Charles Farrell. The record was found quite quickly, a record of a birth in 1909 in Poplar. Unfortunately, because it was before 1916, no mother's maiden name was supplied. However, we could use the name Charles Farrell to search the 1911 census, and what we found next made our jaws drop. This is the original census form completed by a William Farrell, who is shown as head of the household. The address is 81 St Stephen's Road, Bow. The Charles Farrell we found the birth for was his son, and Emily Farrell is shown as his wife. But how do we know that this is Aunt Em Keoghoe? There are 4 reasons. Firstly, she's the right age. Secondly, she was born in the right place and she has the right name. Thirdly, her occupation is as it was in 1901. And finally, her brother is living in the same house. There is a lot of information in this document. Aunt M. Keogh is on here claiming to be the wife of the head of the household, William Farrell. She claims to have been married in about 1905, and because she's taken the name Farrell, it explains why she isn't in the record as Keogh. At the bottom of the list of occupants is Albert Keoghoe, obviously Albert Keogh, who we know as Farrell. This mistranscription of his name, mistaking an O for an S, is why he couldn't be found in the public record. Farrell is shown as a French polisher, another surprise. It is not a trade he was known for. And to round it all off, there is a child older than Charles, and he is called William John Farrell, born in about 1906. It doesn't take too much working out that this person was going to be researched, but the first urgent job was to find a marriage certificate, because there has never been any hint that Aunt M. Keogh ever had a husband before Alfred Snooks. If there had been any suspicion, it wouldn't have been spoken about, as was quite usual for those days, but importantly, it would not have been passed down in the family for others to know. The researchers also had no reason to suspect Aunt M. Keogh had ever been married. On her marriage certificate to Alfred Snooks in 1916, as seen here, she is shown as a spinster. The research started to move quickly now. An important finding was that there was no marriage certificate for a William Farrell or an Emily Keogh other than with Alfred Snooks in 1916. All variations of spelling were tried, but the records were adamant, no marriage certificate. The claim on the 1911 census that they were married and had been so for 6 years could not be proven. This was in keeping with what family had always thought, that Alfred Snooks was Aunt M's first husband. However, we then turned to William John Farrell, the 5-year-old son in the census. We found him very easily in 1906, but we didn't just find a birth registration, we found the baptism, and it is seen here showing one of the most important claims by Aunt M. Keogh. She was parent to the child, and listed with her as father was William Farrell. Normally, the census return and the baptism certificate would be taken as pretty solid evidence that a woman who said they were a wife and a mother was indeed a wife and a mother. It may well be true, but the evidence was advising caution about such claims. First of all, there is no marriage on record, and Aunt M's own admission on her marriage to Alfred Snooks, that she was a spinster, leads us away from her ever being married before 1916. Secondly, Aunt M. Keogh was at home in 1901 with her brother and parents, yet by 1906 she was the mother of a child with no evidence of a marriage. Had she had a child out of wedlock? In fact, had she had 2 children out of wedlock, contrary to what the family had been led to believe? The only avenue open now was to send off for birth certificates of both children, and here they are. First of all, the oldest child, William John Farrell. Aunt M. Keogh is the mother, but she shows herself as Farrell. She is also the mother of the younger child, Charlie Farrell. As far as the family knew, Aunt M didn't have any children of her own until John Snooks was born in 1920, 4 years after she married Alfred Snooks. Whilst the mystery is over, the story isn't. A quick look at Aunt M's life reveals great hardship and loss, most of which the family have never known. She lost 2 brothers and 2 sisters before she was 19. She must have keenly felt the loss of a 17-year-old brother William, as they were only 1 year apart in age, only to be followed by her baby sister Alice Maud, aged 4, in 1903. She would then have a child herself in 1906 to a man she wasn't married to. And then in 1909, Aunt M was 6 months pregnant with Charlie Farrell when her mother died, aged only 48. Aunt M was set up for a decent life, finally, with William Farrell and their 2 sons. Then in 1912, William Farrell died. All her hopes for the future might have died with him. The feelings must have been all too familiar, but now she had 2 children to raise with no means of support. Then, in 1916, She married widower Alfred Snooks and took on his 3 children. There was relative calm in her life for 5 years. She had a son, John Snooks, in 1920. But then in 1921, her eldest son, William, died. A parent should never outlive their child. In 1936, her husband died, aged 57, leaving Aunt Em to spend the rest of her life alone until she herself died, aged 89, in 1973. Aunt Em Snooks, as I remember her, she wasn't a very talkative lady. I remember somebody very subdued, with silver white hair, thick rimmed glasses, pronounced false teeth, a square Keoghoe jaw. I remember her in dark clothing, maybe with a white shawl and a walking stick. She died in about 1973 when I was 25, but I don't remember going to the funeral. And I feel sure I could have, because that saddens me after knowing what I know now. And if Aunt Em was subdued and not very talkative, I think I now know why.